Hi, I'm Hank Will, Editor-in-Chief of Grit Magazine, and I'm here today to talk to you about raising poultry of all kinds, but chickens in particular. We're going to start from either eggs or chicks and go through the entire process. My helper today is Madge, the Walker Blackwing Bronze Turkey. She's very curious. She's a very rare bird, literally, and we tolerate her. She helps us with chores around the farm and whatnot. Everything that I'm about to tell you today is encapsulated in the Grit Magazine's Guide to Backyard Chickens. You can also find the information on our websites, www.grit.com, www.motherearthnews.com, and our sort of ever active www.communitychickens.com. So one of the first things that you'll likely do is choose the breed of poultry that you want to raise, chickens perhaps, and let's focus on chickens. Really all you need to think about initially is whether you want to raise birds for meat or birds for eggs, and let's focus on birds for eggs initially. Typically you would order day-old chicks in the mail from any number of hatcheries, and you can find those lists of hatcheries just doing a Google search for baby chicks or chick hatcheries or chicken hatcheries, whatever. Those birds will come to you in the mail, yes, believe it or not. What's really cool about chickens is that the chicks are born with sufficient nutrients available to them and moisture that they can live, I shouldn't even say last, they can thrive for a couple of days at least before they need any additional food or water. So they can transport in the mail fairly well. And I think that's the way to start if you're a person who's fairly new to poultry. But the other alternative is to get a hold of some fertile eggs. And if you get fertile eggs, you'll need to have an incubator on hand ahead of time. And we do both here. I mean, I've been raising poultry for about 30 years. Sometimes we incubate our own eggs. Sometimes we incubate eggs that we obtain from friends. And a lot of times we just order chicks in the mail. But if you're going to incubate eggs, you need an incubator. I'm really fond of the Octagon family of incubators from Brinzy. And I'm not being paid to give you a commercial for one particular brand, but it's worked really well for us over the years. And if you're going to incubate eggs with chicken eggs, just basically need to follow some fairly strict guidelines for temperature and humidity control in the incubator. And if you do it right, in 3 weeks' time, you'll have a bunch of little chicks that will hatch out. And then you need to treat those chicks pretty much as you would the day-old chicks that would come to you in the mail. I think what's key to keeping chicks alive once they're hatched and once they're out of the incubator is clean water, healthy food, and heat. I think heat is probably one of the most paramount sort of environmental parameters that you have to keep track of. So what do you do with these chicks when they get home? You have a couple of options. You have many options, actually. You need to put them in something that's called a brooder. And a brooder can be as simple as a ring of corrugated cardboard on a concrete floor or on a wooden floor. Okay? You can set that up. You put some wood chips or ground corn cob or something into the bottom of that. Hang a couple of heat lamps over it. Something like this. This is a really nice lamp. It's got a clamp. You can hang it by the bail here. You can hang it by the clamp. But you want to be able to adjust it up or down over the space. But one of the things you want to be really, really careful with when you're brooding chicks is you want to be sure that the lamp, the light bulb itself, is designed for brooding chicks. There are a lot of coating materials that manufacturers put on the lamps, and there is a Teflon containing coating that when it gets hot puts off some, for lack of a better word, fumes. I don't know that it's a true vapor, but it will kill, or it can kill, entire groups of chickens overnight if the ventilation is really poor and the bulb is brand new especially. So be sure that you get a bulb that doesn't specifically say not for use with livestock or not for use with chickens. And really, if it's a fairly drafty, non-drafty place, that's all you need to do, and you just raise the birds in that setting until they're a month or more old, fully fledged out, and then you can move them outdoors, unless it's -20 out or something like that. Alternatively, if you're doing smaller batches of birds, You can actually make a brooder out of a cardboard box. Essentially, you open up a cardboard box. In fact, you can even make it larger with by joining a couple of cardboard boxes. Do the same thing, add the chips or the bedding material, feeders, waterers, hang a heat lamp over it, and you're pretty good to go. If you plan on doing it more often, you could use something like a small stock tank, or you could even use a large stock tank depending on the size of the flock you're starting. And again, you just add bedding, feeders, which you'd fill with feed, and waterers, which you'd use to keep the birds well hydrated. Now, one of the questions that a lot of folks have with regard to brooding is, how do you know that the temperature is right? Because we're talking about a fairly crude system here where we're hanging a heat lamp over a space, right? It's not like we have a thermostat control in this particular setup. Basically what you do is you hang the heat lamp over the one end of the brooder or the other, and watch the chicks, check out their behavior. If they all huddle together beneath the lamp, it's really too cold in there, and so you can raise the temperature by lowering the lamp a couple of inches. If they're all sort of in a ring, organized in a ring around the light that's put off by the lamp, it's probably a little bit too warm. And if they're laying on their sides and their wings are out and their legs are out and they're panting a little bit, it's way too warm. If it's too warm in the brooder, you definitely want to raise the lamp up. And eventually you'll get to a place where the chicks, groups of chicks will be evenly dispersed beneath the lamp while others are making trips over to the water or over to the feeder. And you can also monitor the happiness of the chicks by sound. Instead of sort of loud, persistent peeping, you'll hear really just sort of a gentle, I find it to be very relaxing, kind of murmuring sound, where they're all just kind of talking to each other. Half of them are sleeping, some of them are eating, some of them are drinking, and whatnot. Now, if you want to get into this in a little bit more, larger scale, maybe a little bit more organized scale, you can choose a commercial brooder. This is a small battery brooder. You could actually get whole racks of these things into your barn. These have heating elements in them that are thermostatically controlled. I find that this kind of a brooder is convenient, but at the expense of being a little more difficult to clean or add fresh bedding to than the open container. But I think it's really up to you. It's up to whatever your resources are, whatever your facility is kind of like. So you want to have your brooder ready to go before your chicks arrive. You should theoretically have it turned on for maybe 12 hours or so before you put the chicks in to be sure that the temperature is there and stabilizes. Plenty of people don't do that, but that's sort of the rule of thumb. But don't panic if you forgot to turn it on and your chicks arrived in the mail. The one thing that's really important to do as you add the chicks to the brooder is to dip their beaks in the water so that they know where it is. They'll get the notion of hydration, and within short order they'll actually copy each other as the more precocious individuals make their way to the water and drink. That's a really good sign. You get them drinking. Getting them eating is really a no-brainer after that. If your birds aren't eating or don't seem too interested in eating, scatter some feed on the floor or on the litter in the brooder, because they do have a natural sort of pecking instinct. And once you get that going, then it's just sort of daily care, monitoring the temperature, providing fresh, clean water, and keeping their food bins or food troughs topped off. And the one other way that you can take eggs and create chickens out of them is to let a hen who becomes naturally broody, that means she really wants to sit on a clutch of eggs and incubate it herself. If you have a hen that wants to do that, if you can give her some privacy, a nest box that's maybe a little bit out of the way, you can collect up eggs from any of your other chickens. You can even collect eggs from your turkeys or whatever else you have, slip them under her on the nest. She'll hatch them for you. She'll take care of all the temperature regulation. She'll take care of the turning and the humidity control. And the best part is, once they hatch, she'll teach them how to be chickens, and she'll have them out pecking at the things that are really good for chickens to be pecking at. She'll teach them to scratch in the dirt, to dust bathe, all of that kind of thing. And so they wind up being really a little bit further ahead when you introduce them to the outdoor spaces than birds that you artificially brood in using one of the other more sort of traditional methods that I've described. So now we've covered some different ways to get those chicks going. Now let's go consider how to grow them on. Now once you're ready to take the birds outside, it's helpful to have a place where they can live, where the other chickens can see them, such as this old chicken tractor. We used to actually use this to take around the farm to let the birds have fresh grass to graze. But we changed our model and we don't use it anymore for that, but we left it in the main egg layer coop area as a device to introduce new cohorts of chickens to the old cohort of chickens and mitigate any kinds of battling as a result of that. So basically what we do is we take the chickens that are ready, the fledged out chickens that we brooded, and on a fairly warm day we'll relocate them into this old chicken tractor and actually lock them in with sufficient food and water. And we added some additional wind screening to the back end so they can actually get out of the wind, they can get out of the rain, no problem. In the hot summertime they can get shade. And they live pretty happily in here for about a week to 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the old hens, they can come up, they can get to know them, get to see each other. So after a couple of weeks, you open the door on the chicken tractor. I actually call it the halfway house. We open up the halfway house. The new cohort sort of makes its way out as it feels brave, begins to mingle with the old cohort. They already know each other, so there's no bloodletting, there's no really bad fighting, nothing like that goes on. There will be some change in the pecking order, and you'll see some birds feign toward each other, but everybody gets food, everybody gets water, and eventually everybody will move into the chicken house, which is over here. The ideal chicken house for an egg-laying flock will have several different characteristics that are really important. First of all, you need to have it be a safe place that will keep the predators sort of off the birds, especially at night. You want to have roost space inside so that they can actually roost in the evening. That's how they like to sleep. You need to have a nest box or 2 or 3, depending on however many birds you have, so that the hens will feel safe and inclined to go in and lay their eggs. And ideally, those nest boxes will have access to the outside so you can collect the eggs without having to go inside. You can see that this particular chicken house isn't any great beauty, but we built it entirely of recycled materials that were actually up in one of the barn lofts, including the windows. We raised it up about a foot or so off the ground to discourage things like rats or skunks or possums from setting up house underneath the coop. If you're using a coop or a house like this with a floor, you don't want to set it too close to the ground, or it provides a really nice spot for vermin, so to speak, to set up shop. And some of those animals will actually try to kill and eat your birds or steal eggs and whatnot. If you're going to set a coop on the ground, directly on the ground, I think it's pretty useful to just leave it open, bare earth, so that they can scratch and dust bathe there, and you can try to figure out ways to keep the critters out by bending wire out from the outside along the ground so that they won't be able to burrow in. And I'll show you an example of that in just a few minutes. You obviously need to have an access point for the birds. Some folks call it a pop hole. We just call it the chicken door. You need to be able to close it up at night. So this will just hinge down, and we have a couple of butterflies here that we can just turn to lock it. And believe it or not, you don't have to have a ramp for the birds, and we don't have an ideal ramp here. The birds will use this ramp. They can get traction on it, but when the ramp blows off, this is Kansas and the wind blows pretty hard sometimes, it falls. They have no trouble jumping and flying in and out. But ideally, we keep a ramp going. To make this ramp better, we could screw battens across to give them some more traction. It would be helpful in the wintertime. But again, our birds have never had trouble getting in or out of it. What's key for the birds' comfort and health, in addition to having good roosting space and whatnot, is you want to have a deep bedding on the floor of the chicken house. If you detect any ammonia smell, any really bad manure smell, it's time to clean the chicken house. And if you consistently have a lot of ammonia smell, you might want to check and see if you've got ventilation problems. Dry manure doesn't smell like ammonia. Anaerobically digesting manure generates ammonia. So once you do that, what you need to do is be sure that summer and winter the chicken house is ventilated. We have a vent in the back of the house, just under the eave, the full length. Because we're in Kansas, we don't have that adjustable. It's just open all the time. And then the front vents consist of the 2 windows, and we leave the windows down 4 inches at least at the top in the wintertime, and we'll drop those windows all the way down in the summertime so that they'll be ventilated. I raised chickens for many years in South Dakota where the winters get really cold, and even there I left the vents open all winter long. You know, and the chickens were fine, even though at the end of the day there'd be ice on the water. Of course, we changed the water day and night, but the chickens were fine. Another thing you want to really consider is how you will get in and out of the chicken house. So on ours, and on I think any chicken house that's of any size, you want to have what we'd call a human door at one end or the other, so that you can actually open up, you can poke your head in there, you can adjust things that need adjusting, and most importantly, you can clean it out and clean it out easily. So this is one kind of chicken house, one way of skinning that cat. Let's go ahead and check out another way to build a chicken coop for even less money. Here we've got another example of a chicken house that you can put together pretty easily. We keep a couple of different laying flocks, so this house is also for a flock of laying birds. And if you look inside, you'll see there's nest boxes and perches just like before. This particular house we built using some extra 16-foot cattle panels that we had, and we took 3 of them and bent them into an arc, fastened them to a frame that we made with dimensional lumber that we also found in the loft of the old barn, and then covered it with a tarp, one of the fairly inexpensive tarps that you could get at a big box store. And believe it or not, this tarp has just finished its 4th year. It really needs to be replaced, but we probably won't do it until spring. Now, because we worry a little bit about wind and temperature control in the wintertime and the summertime, we did go ahead and buy some corrugated plastic material and shaped it to the end panels so we can tighten up or open up the ventilation kind of based on the season and what our chickens seem to like. We typically, even all winter, leave the front panels open and close up just 2/3 or so of the back panel, and that seems to work just fine for our birds. Now, one thing you'll notice about this particular chicken yard is that it's much greener than the yard that we were in previously, and the reason for that is because late last fall I tilled up the space. We didn't have any chickens out here. I tilled up the space and broadcast seeded a mixture of winter wheat, some kale, and some grazing turnips. Basically stirred them into the ground, and as luck would have it in Kansas this year, we actually got a rain about 3 days after I did that. Things sprouted. We had a second rain and they began to grow pretty nicely, and then of course the rain turned off, so the wheat didn't get very high yet, and it could still perform nicely in the springtime. But we needed to move some chickens into this pen, and so we did move this sort of motley flock in, and we let them out several times a week to graze down whatever greenery is there. That's one of the things that you can do to keep sort of your chicken yards fresh, to take advantage of any manure that the birds have dropped out there, is if you can block the birds out of the chicken yard or out of a portion of the chicken yard for a couple of months, you can seed it with a cover crop, and then you can open it up to your birds. They'll happily graze that stuff, and they'll produce some of the richest, most delicious, and brightest orange yolked eggs that you've ever seen. Now, if you've been looking around my place as we have today, you can see that we have some turkeys around along with the chickens, and in fact we've got some turkeys living with chickens. Call me crazy, call me unconventional, call me stupid. My entire poultry raising life, I've had turkeys, mixed flocks of turkeys with my chickens, and I've never lost one turkey to blackhead disease or any other chicken-borne turkey disease. I'm not saying that sage advice to keep them separated is wrong. I'm just saying that in my experience, in a very open sort of setting such as this, we've never had a problem with that. You also notice that we keep some waterfowl around. We have a small flock of cotton patch geese, which are a endangered heritage breed, and our intent is to try to increase the numbers of those. And we also have some ducks around the place as well. Frankly, fowl of virtually all kinds really give us a lot of pleasure here on the farm, provide us a lot of food, and then do a bunch of work for us in terms of stirring up garden space, feeding us, bug control, you name it. And in fact, we have almost no ticks and almost no grasshoppers in this general vicinity of the barnyard, thanks to the turkeys and the chickens. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about raising chicks for meat. We call them broilers, and we've got some broilers that are almost ready to process here. We'll be processing them in a couple of weeks. But come on over and let's talk a little bit about raising broilers. So here we are in the broiler pen. The broiler pen this year is actually the place where I grew corn for grain for the house last year. And we throw the broilers in here for a couple of reasons. One, they'll help to refertilize the space, and they'll also stir up the soil a little bit. The thing about the broiler chickens is that, at least this particular breed of broiler chickens, you start them out the same way, you brood them the same as we talked about before, but you feed them a higher protein ration or feed, if you will. These are white rocks crossed with white Cornish, and they're eating growing machines. We still insist on raising them outside so that they can actually act like chickens act. And believe it or not, there are a couple of them that can actually fly up and perch on top of their little shelter. They're not quite as lazy if you turn the feed off as if you just let them eat ad lib all day. So where most folks might process these birds after, say, 8 to 10 weeks, we will typically process them at about 12 to 13 weeks of age. Really, the only things to consider when raising the broilers is that these birds really have a fixed lifespan. Physiologically, this particular breed, which is really the dreaded commercial broiler, tastes very good when you raise it outside. The muscle comes off with a much firmer texture and good flavor. But these birds' physiology is such that they really don't have an off switch at maturity to stop growing. So they'll get larger, fatter, if you will, and have more and more skeletal, respiratory, and even circulatory problems. At some point, you'll start losing them to things like heart attack, in addition to just inability to even get around to feed themselves anymore. So if you're looking for some really tasty chicken to eat in a fairly efficient production model, these birds are okay. I would recommend that if you do the corn rock crosses like these, to raise them outside, cut their ration by about a third, and let them run out of feed both morning and evening. Don't let them sit there with feed in their trough. That way they'll be enticed to go out and about, work the ground a little bit. If we had greenery here, they'd be eating it, chase grasshoppers, you name it. They get to be a little bit like chickens under these conditions. Now, we pen these birds up at night into a little shelter because we have a big owl problem here, and that's really the easiest way of doing it. I prefer to raise these broilers with more space than the average chicken tractor or range tractor setup provides, but that's another option that folks use for raising these kinds of birds. If you don't want to do the corn rocks, if you really want to get away from that industrial bird altogether, there are some other options. Just check with all the resources, look for heavy meat breeds, and you'll find many different choices of birds that will grow much more slowly, much more naturally, and offer you some of the tastiest chicken out there. Okay, we're almost done, but before we go, I want to talk to you a little bit about an unconventional option for housing poultry. Our farm's a long ways away from having produced any significant grain crop, and even when it did produce grain crops, you can see that it didn't produce all that much, judging from the size of this old grain bin. This is really small by today's standards, and it's pretty much worthless unless you can use it for housing poultry or other small animals. And so we've taken this particular grain bin, and rather than trying to scrap it out, we've opened the door, we've added some not very pretty nest boxes and perches, and the turkeys will often go in there, and the geese in particular will set up their nests there in the springtime, and they can get out of the weather anytime they want to, because the door is always open. So if you've got structures like that on your farm, always be thinking about how you could use them for poultry or for other small animals, or even for storage if you want. It might not be useful for what it was originally designed for, but it could make a nice shed or a nice chicken house. Thanks for joining Madge and me for a very special barnyard tour. If you want to know any more information about raising poultry of any kinds, be sure to visit our websites, www.grit.com, www.motherearthnews.com, communitychickens.com, and don't forget to take a look at our great publications. You can find all kinds of poultry raising advice in those pages. Thanks.